Nice.
I bought Cliff Kingsbury's house in Arizona.
Yeah, look at the hills in the background. You're definitely not in Florida,
No,
Mark.
it's not, huh?
Is that where you've been all these weeks?
That's where I've been, yes. Setting the studio up.
Nice.
And here we were thinking you were hard at work.
Right.
So is that how's the timing now, Mark, as far as work and newsletters? Now that the bowl season is over,
it's manageable now. Before it was really just totally chaotic and just way too many irons in the fire and things going on. Now that the regular college football season is over, the bowls are over, we're into the playoffs, it'll be a lot more manageable. So looking forward to getting back in the saddle, per se, if you will.
And before you know it, we'll start talking college basketball too.
Yeah, unbelievable. How about this, guys? We have to put our first basketball newsletter out tomorrow. And when I get finished with this, I'm going to jump knee deep into the database that Victor's put together for me for college and pro basketball and get into it. So it'll be kind of a cursory look for me at basketball so far this football season, but it is what it is.
I want to ask a little question about college basketball. Normally I do pretty well. I've had a hard time this year with them. Is that what you guys are experiencing? Is it just me?
I haven't gotten deeply involved. I've been looking more at certain spot plays to make a handful, but not even enough to consider it enough data points. But once again, it seems like, it's so much this transfer portal. These teams, so many of these teams look no different or look so much different from one year to the next that it's hard to establish any true form factors.
Yeah, remember, you took off the college football season, and this would have been just as viable a reason to take off the college basketball season because, as Andy said, at least in college football, you have like 70 kids, and some of them are still on your team and making a difference. In college basketball, you could have like an entire team is new.
You're right. I probably should have taken off the whole basketball season too, and just followed somebody else because I had a good college football season, and I didn't handicap a game. No. So I just followed some people that bet money, and they there's some good people out there that really know what they're doing, including
they're the ones who probably specialize in college football and don't. Who cares if the NFL is popular? If I can make money doing college football where there are 134 teams, so there's more opportunities, why not just concentrate on that? Because every hour that I would spend doing the NFL is 1 hour I'm not spending college football, and I think that's
the same thing with it's the same thing with the WNBA or women's college basketball. Those things are beatable, and I don't think the odds makers, they probably don't spend as much time trying to figure out a good number as they do in the regular NBA.
Well, the volume is less. The limits are less. The games are less. Even in the NFL, you have to believe that they're spending more time breaking down 16 NFL games and what the line should be, as opposed to spending the same amount of time breaking down 55 college football games, some of which will have little interest, some of which will have a lot of interest, but none of which will draw the volume of a single NFL game.
Oh, that's true.
Hey, guys, what do you say? Let's get into breaking down the playoff games this weekend, if we can, for both the college football playoff and the NFL playoffs as well.
Yeah, that way I can run over to the pizza show.
There you go. You can make your pizza.
Only got a couple of weeks left because that ends with the Super Bowl.
You got to get that pepperoni while it's hot, Jim. That's all I know.
Well, hopefully you at least get. Hopefully, Jim, you at least get the pizza during the bye week between these championships and Super Bowl.
They'll send me one for free.
Hey, I want to remind everybody watching and listening out there that we just wrapped up our playoff guide newsletter yesterday, and it's just jam packed with a lot of great stuff on both the college football playoff and the NFL playoffs. Breakdowns on every NFL and college football team. And in fact, inside of the newsletter this week, we outlined one team in the NFL playoffs that has outgained all 10 of the other playoff teams they faced thus far this football season. And not only did they outgain all 10 teams, they won the stats by an average of 118 yards a game. There's one of those monsters playing on the NFL football playoffs this particular weekend. And there's also an NFL coach who's never lost the money in his career in the playoffs as an underdog, and he's an underdog this weekend.
Really?
Go download that newsletter now, guys. The playoff football preview guide newsletter at playbooksports.com just in time for the football games this weekend. Guys, let's go around the horn and see what's going on here right now. I know we're talking about the college football playoffs coming up here, and let me ask everybody your initial take on how and what we got here to the semifinals here. Andy, any surprises you saw along the way that got us here to the college football playoffs at this stage of the season?
Yeah, somewhat. Notre Dame had a pretty easy time getting there with wins that were double digits against Indiana, a game that wasn't that close. When I look at Ohio State, in fact, I think I wrote it in my newsletter this week that if you thought that the Buckeyes were going to be vulnerable after losing 13-10 to Michigan at home to end the season, you would have been wrong. That Michigan game turned out to be the outlier based upon what we saw them do to a very good Tennessee team and even a better Oregon team that they had played tooth and nail. The first time they met, I think this time Tooth showed up. Nail didn't because, well, actually, I'm sorry. Nail showed up. Tooth didn't because Ohio State nailed Oregon in this game. So that was a little bit surprising. As far as Texas goes, a little concerned about their defensive play in their two wins to get here against Arizona State and previously that against Clemson. But, again, maybe and when we talk about these games, if we do talk about these games, I would say, we might be a little concerned. Can Ohio State continue to perform the way that it did in those two playoff games? And will Texas' team perform better defensively than it did? These teams, by the way, Texas and Ohio State, number 1 and 2 as far as defensive yards per play over the entire season, including the postseason. And then, take a look at the fourth team, which is Penn State. And, this is when I thought it became a big game for James Franklin, because this is the time to advance to the championship game. The first two games were nice, but this is the opportunity to get closer, to get to play for the national title. I thought that Ohio State, even with that loss to Michigan, was underseeded. If Georgia, despite winning an SEC championship and beating Texas twice, I thought if Georgia could be a number 2 seed, Ohio State at least should be one of the third or the fourth seed. It's hard to say that Arizona State was poorly seeded given their performance in both of their games. You could make a better case perhaps that Boise State may have been overseeded.
Hey, Victor, let me ask you this. Andy mentions the seeds here, and I think they're kind of wacky in the sense that the number 8 seed in the playoffs right now is the favorite to win the college football playoff. Do you kind of think that the NCAA should do a different job of seeding these teams at the beginning of the playoffs? I mean, Boise State number 4, Ohio State number 8. Does that make any sense to you?
No.
We are in the first year of the college football playoffs, so it's definitely going to be a learning process. Mark, you asked about surprising things. Andy briefly touched on it, but let me mention the fact that Notre Dame basically has completely flipped the script when it comes to traditional Notre Dame play. They've thrived all season long with fast pace and explosive plays. If you remember back in the day, they used to grow the grass really, really high in the Notre Dame football stadium, supposedly to slow down the athleticism of the opposing speed on the other team, because the other colleges were getting the much, much better athletes than the Fighting Irish. Now, they went to artificial turf back in the 2014 season to kind of combat that. And after going a full decade on artificial turf, it's surprising to me to see that the Irish finally have a football team that can kind of thrive on a fast track. And just take a look at the explosive plays over the last month of play. They broke open the Sugar Bowl with a 98-yard kickoff return against Georgia. They set the tone in their game against Indiana with a 98-yard touchdown run. Who was it? Jeremiah Love, I believe. It was his 4th run of more than 60 yards this season. He's the only running back in college football who has more than, of course, Ashton Agenti of the Boise State. So 4 touchdowns of 98 yards or more in a 3-game period is just absolutely absurd. But it's only a slight escalation of what they did in the 4 games before that. TD runs of 68, 58, both against Army, a 76-yarder against Virginia, a 65-yarder, and an interception return for 79 yards against Florida State. And then again, that 64-yard run against Navy. It's all of a sudden Notre Dame is a big play machine, but the surprising thing is they're not doing it the conventional method, the passing game. They only have one completed pass of more than 50 yards this year, and 0 longer than 60. So again, for me, guys, the surprising thing is all of a sudden Notre Dame is explosive. And one thing you may want to consider in the Thursday night game, if you do watch the podcast this afternoon, is consider a Notre Dame special teams or defensive touchdown in tonight's game against Penn State.
Well, I know they put up like 17 points in less than a minute against Georgia to get here, and the special teams helped out on all of that.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe largely attributed to Marcus Freeman, if more than anything else here of late. There were talks that when Ryan Day was on the hottest of hot seats at Ohio State after the Michigan loss, that the Buckeyes were zeroing in on Marcus Freeman, to possibly make his way to Columbus here. It's not going to happen. He's going to be locked up for a long time at Notre Dame. And if Ohio State wins this playoff, so too will Ryan Day. I don't see anything changing there that way.
Greg, at least until next year, if he loses to Michigan again.
Yeah.
Even if he wins a national championship, if he goes back and loses to Michigan again, he's going to be on the hot seat again.
So if he wins the national championship, loses to Michigan, he's out, is what you're saying, right?
That could be very possible. Absolutely. Yes.
Wow.
They're crazy, those Buckeye fans. Really crazy.
So what do you think about all that, Jim? Are either any of these coaches that are coaching here today likely to be coaching elsewhere sooner than later?
Well, the fan bases pretty much demand changing all the time. They do in the pros for sure. We just had Black Monday, which didn't have as many firings as I thought we'd have. But yes, I think these teams. I mean, Franklin has this reputation that he can't win the big game, and so this has to be a really. I mean, you guys know more about college football than I do, but this has to really be big for him to get to this point, and he's constantly criticized he can't win these big games. So this would be big if he could win it.
Well, it'd be huge for him, obviously. Maybe, shake that ugliness, that egg that he has in his face about choking in big-time football games here. Hey, let's go over to the Cotton Bowl, guys, and take a look at that Ohio State-Texas matchup. And I think, just myself personally, these 4 teams that have made it thus far in the college football playoffs, I think we've got the strongest possible Final Four teams we could have asked for. Penn State, a little bit of an iffy thing, but you can't refute what Penn State's done this year. You can't refute what any of these football teams have done. Ohio State, Texas could well be a championship type matchup, if you will. Andy, what do you think happens between the Buckeyes and the Longhorns tomorrow?
Well, I sort of alluded to it before, where can Ohio State have a third straight dominating performance like we've seen so far? And can Texas play as sloppily on defense as they have in their first 2 games? I'm inclined to think that we'll get a better defensive effort out of Texas. They've been so good all year. They actually played decent defense in both games against Georgia earlier this year when they lost in the championship game and then in the regular season game. The concern for Ohio State is we know they've got a great defense. Will the quarterback be able to get the same kind of play? Because you could make a case that maybe when at their best, or certainly playing their typical game, Texas may be the best defense that they will have seen this year. So when I look at the game, I look at the fact that I do like. Now, I don't know that it's going to matter that the game's being played in Dallas, where it would expect to have a huge contingent of Texas fans for the tickets that are not allotted to either of the 2 teams. But Ohio State travels well, so I wouldn't be surprised if they had their hands on the click button as soon as those tickets went on sale to the public, and they got a lot of them as well. So I don't know that it'll be a factor, but certainly the site would tend to figure to to benefit Texas more than the other team. The other thing I like about Texas is they've got two solid quarterback options should that need be, and perhaps and if I'm Sarkisian, maybe I do exactly that I go with an sort of an alternative game plan, not necessarily on a series by series or a half basis, but have certain series, certain situations, Ewers gets in there and others Manning gets in there, and that because if you've got to prepare for two really good quarterbacks, that means you're spending some time not preparing for the one quarterback that the other team is preparing for, and there could be certain situations in the game where that could come into play. The numbers statistically are fairly even. I don't give either team much of a decided edge in those areas. What I do think is Ohio State, and I'm rooting against Ohio State because I have the ticket on anyone but Ohio State and Georgia to win the national title. But when I take my heart out of it, I have to think Ohio State is the better team. I'm taking the 6 points. I wouldn't be surprised if the game comes down to I've got it. I think Victor said he likes the under. I do like the under significantly because of the two defenses. I wouldn't be surprised if the game is something like 23-20. I think the points come into play because both of these teams are so evenly matched in terms of talent and an accomplishment.
Let me ask you this, Jim. Has your guy mentioned anything or whispered anything to you about this Ohio State-Texas game as far as the side goes in the contest?
He bet Ohio State.
Ohio State, okay.
And I really wish I could give more narrative because he doesn't tell me why. He just tells me he bet, and he bets a lot. So you actually know him, Mark, but I can't mention his name.
Okay. Someday you'll share it with me.
I definitely will. Now, I have to ask this. My wife is from Cleveland.
Yes,
you
so
both,
am I.
Victor and Mark, are both from Cleveland. Are we allowed to like the other side?
Yeah, from a wallet standpoint, yes. Yes.
But if we
just
bet
not
the
the
side
Michigan
and
game,
lose
though.
the money, then boy, we're going to be in trouble.
You know what I find unique in this game, guys, is Ohio State is deeply, deeply talented. They recruit as well as any team in college football, especially now that Nick Saban's no longer at Alabama. But if there's any team in this playoff that recruits as well as Ohio State, it's Texas. And I almost fell off my chair when I came across this, and I shared it in our playoff guide, that over 90% of the players that are on the Texas roster are 4- and 5-star recruits. Over 90%. That's like unjust in a sense. Now, sometimes they don't play to the level of being a 4- or 5-star recruit, but the talent's at least there, and they go 2-3 deep. And like Andy mentions, even Manning being a quarterback, not even starting, and he's a 5-star recruit himself in that sense. Greg, what do you think happens in this?
Excuse me. One last thing to just keep for whatever emphasis you want to place on it. Texas was in the Final Four. Well, the 4-team playoff last year, so they do have experience with a lot of that same roster. They lost to Washington, I believe.
They've also got a quarterback in Ewers that was recruited by Ryan Day before he transferred out. So I don't know how much that plays into it, if it's a soap opera issue or not. But Ryan Day really, really reveres Ewers. He thinks he's a first-class gentleman and wishes him nothing but the best and success. But Ryan Day, if he brought him
except this week.
Yeah, except this week. Exactly. Greg, what do you think happens here, Ohio State, Texas, in this bowl game?
I think from everything we've seen with Ohio State this year, I think we see much of the same. The Michigan game clearly woke them up. We had no idea what to expect in that game. Nobody did. And immediately, from the very first possession, when he marched down the field and scored a touchdown, they have not looked back. I think the only way Ohio State loses this game is if Ohio State loses this game. If something happens like what happened in the Michigan game, if now all of a sudden the tide has turned and everybody's talking about how great they are again and they're buying into it again, I don't think that's going to happen because it fresh in their minds is what happened in the Michigan game. It's not the Ohio State fans won't let them forget it. So they know what's at stake. It's win the national championship or you guys suck. That's basically how the fans think in Ohio State after losing to Michigan again. So I think because of that, they have a goal that they're not going to let slip out. Let's remember, this was the most talented team in college football when the season began, not just because of the 5- and 4-star recruits that you also said, Mark, that Ohio State has and Texas has, but because of all the key transfers that they spent big money on, including the quarterback, the running back, and other players. And it's finally all coming to fruition. They are the best team in college football right now. They are going to win this game easy. They'll have a tough time against, I think, Penn State in the national championship game before beating them late. Probably a early fourth quarter game. But this is Ohio State's national championship to win now, and a team that couldn't stop Clemson when they had no running game, none. Everybody knew Clemson had to throw the football. Texas couldn't stop the passing game. Then Texas places Arizona State. They knew all you had to do is stop the running game. They have no passing game. Their number one receivers out. All you have to do is stop Arizona State's Cam Scatterbo. Couldn't do it. So now they're playing Ohio State, got a running game and a passing game. They're not going to stop either one. I think this game could be just like the Oregon game, and I think it could be over at halftime.
Who do you think has the coaching advantage in this game, if either?
I'm not sold on either guy. I think I would give it to Ryan Day just a little bit. Mark and I have talked a lot about Sarkisian over the years, and undoubtedly he's done a good job recently. Like you guys said, he made the playoffs last year, and that was a good step for him. And it was a close loss in the playoff game to Washington. They almost won that football game. They had a shot at the end. And he's got this team back to the semifinals again. And the one thing Sarkisian's doing right is what Mark said. He's recruiting. That's what you got to do as a college coach. If you keep all those 4- and 5-star kids from Texas at home, you're going to have a good team. Now you just have to make sure that you can coach in the big games. And I just like in that playoff game to Washington, I don't know if he's capable of doing that. So I think because of that, I don't think he's like a difference maker. And therefore, I just think Ohio State is just too good. It's not knock against Sarkisian or the Texas players. Keep in mind, a lot of the top Texas players that were on the team last year are not there. Xavier Worthy's gone to Kansas City. The tight end's gone to Carolina. The running back's gone to Carolina. So all those big guys, the guys that were the superstars on offense for them last year, are not there. They're still very talented. Don't get me wrong. But the Ohio State is a lot more talented as far as experience and upper level guys.
Victor, let me ask you before we go over to the NFL playoff side of things here. As Jim mentioned, we're both from Cleveland. We have deep roots with the Ohio State Buckeyes in this contest here. And I would imagine we're going to probably be hoping Ohio State wins the football game. It doesn't matter which side we're betting. We're still hoping they're going to win the football game. What's your take on who wins this game?
We mentioned that we're leaning under in the game, Mark. One of the storylines, though, that I've have been following with great interest, particularly in the last few weeks, was the fact that you got this freshman on Ohio State that is really starting to open eyes, particularly in the postseason. And it reminds me of a college basketball player who 20, 22, 23 years ago kind of set the world on fire in the postseason. I'm talking about Carmelo Anthony and the Syracuse Orange and the unbelievable run they had again 20 years ago in the college basketball playoffs. And we're talking about Jeremiah Smith here, the freshman of Ohio State, the wide receiver of the Buckeyes, highly touted, if you will. Here's a guy, 103 yards on 6 catches and 2 touchdowns in the rout of the Tennessee Volunteers, 7 catches for 187 and 2 touchdowns against number 1 Oregon Ducks. And if either of those 2 games hadn't gotten out of hand so early, perhaps that Jeremiah Smith would even have had greater stats. So that is the storyline, one of the storylines that I'm looking to watch on Friday night with the game, and also in his future with the Ohio State Buckeyes. But it sure reminds me a lot of what Carmelo Anthony did way back 20 years ago, what Jeremiah Smith is doing for the Buckeyes in their wide receiver room.
I thought you were going to refer to LeBron James. They're both generational talents.
Yeah.
And to carry that story forward, when Smith played down here in South Florida, they had a following just like LeBron James had a following in high school. There were people that would go to his high school games and just in droves just to see him play. The same thing with this Smith kid,
Right.
Geno Smith's cousin. So they're deeply talented, and to Ohio State's credit, it's what they do. They bring all this talent in, and let me say this before we go over to the NFL playoffs here. Just a little sidebar note in passing. I was getting my hair cut the other day, and the kid who gets up out of the chair before me, my barber says to me, he said, wow, he really struck it big. I says, what's that? And he says, he was my neighbor here about 15 years ago, and he just played at Illinois as an offensive tackle, and his agent just got him a contract at Texas Tech. He just transferred out for $500,000. 500. The realization hit me right between the eyeballs.
I hope you left a nice tip.
Well, have you heard that the news is that Quinn Ewers is going to transfer and let Peyton Manning son Arch start next year, and instead of entering the NFL draft, he's about to sign a $10 million deal. Now, it hasn't been. Nobody knows where he's going. Some people think it could be North Carolina,
Right.
with Belichick.
Yeah,
But
makes sense.
$10 million to play one more season of college football.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
What did Gabriel earn at Oregon? He was like a close to a $5 million quarterback, wasn't he?
He might have been, yeah. He was getting some pretty good money, so maybe it's not too much of a surprise. But yeah, they're throwing that money around now
Yes,
because
they
they
are.
know that's what it's like. Oh, by the way, just keep this in mind, the weather. And I know they're playing indoors in Dallas, but there's a wintry mix going on right now in Dallas, and they're not used to that, not Dallas. And so I only bring that up because the travel conditions could be really difficult. Now, it's better that it's a wintry mix, but there will be potential ice overnight. That could be an issue, but it's better than, say, a foot of snow. Because they're not, they don't have the proper equipment to move the snow there. They have like one snowstorm in Dallas, like every 10 years, 15 years. So just keep that in mind. That could be something where if you don't see like a full crowd in the audience tomorrow night, then you'll know why.
Because they got froze out, is what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, it's possible. Yes.
Right. Okay, guys, let's get it over to the National Football League playoffs. And before we do, I want to mention this, that in our playoff guide, we have an article in there from Andy Isco, our good friend. And what Andy did is he shared his article that he wrote last year, and he updated it this year. And it's a terrific read. And if you like the wild card games and you want to know all about the importance of buys in the National Football League playoffs, you have to read Andy's article. It's in the playoff guide. A terrific read. It's about everything you'll want to know about it. Great job, Andy. We really appreciate your contribution here. And anybody that gets that guide will have the pleasure of reading your article firsthand.
Well, I thank you for that. And yeah, and it's sort of related to when you're assessing Super Bowl odds and Super Bowl teams, to know a little bit about the history of the importance of, or the lack of importance of playing in that bye week on the wild card weekend. And I do point out, of course, the fact that a lot of it has to do with the recent changes where you used to have 4 teams that had byes with the 1 and 2 seeds in each conference. And of course, when they expanded the playoffs, they took away the bye from the number 2 team. So now only the number 1 teams are the teams that get byes. So it's cut in half from 4 to 2.
Very good. And you can reach Andy at thelogicalapproach.com to check out all of Andy's work here. Just terrific. Thelogicalapproach.com. Guys, before we tear these playoff games apart, these wild card round games, I'm going to go around the block here real quickly and ask anybody's opinion on number 1, surprises that have happened to get here to the playoffs, or number 2, any surprises we'll see coming down the road. Victor, anybody surprised you with their play this year to make the playoffs, or should anybody in the playoffs be a surprise moving forward?
I don't. Let me look at the schedule here, guys.
I know I sort of caught everybody off guard with that question.
Right. Working our way backward, the Rams, a slightly surprising team. We'll see what happens in that particular game with the wildfires out in Los Angeles. Prior to the show, we were talking about the fact that they've announced today there's a contingency plan in which they may actually play that game in Glendale, Arizona, the home of the Arizona Cardinals, on Monday night, depending on what happens with the wildfires out there in Los Angeles. So be prepared for the sight of that particular game to be moved. The surprising team, obviously, this year, considering they drafted a rookie quarterback and were perhaps expected to be here, is the Washington Commanders and the outstanding
excuse
job
me. One thing when you're talking about it, because it's important from a betting standpoint, and that's to make sure you know the rules of your sports book if you've already bet the game, because change in venue very often would void your ticket. So and you'd have to rebet the game.
It probably would,
Yeah.
and the line would probably go to Minnesota
As a result.
3
Yeah.
because you're taking
By the
away-
way,
right, slightly higher. Yeah.
would most sports books give you back your money before the game? Like, would they be able to give you back your money
Yes.
and then you could use that money for
Yes.
the game? They will.
Yes.
Okay,
Right. They
won't hold
they
it.
want your money to bet. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No,
Washington is the team that's the most surprising to be here in the playoffs, considering rookie quarterback, first-year head coach, a lot of new players on that particular team. What a great year for Washington, and what should be one of the more exciting and probably one of the more higher-scoring games of the weekend as they take to the road playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers down here in the Sunshine State.
And Victor, who's the team in the National Football League that was most disappointing that maybe you thought would make the playoffs but didn't this year?
Prior to the season, we talked about there were high expectation for our boys up north, the Cleveland Browns. Not only did they not make the postseason, they'll be drafting number 2 overall in what was a rough year for them. So obviously a team like them, but number 2, the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, 8 weeks ago, I thought that was fantastic value on San Francisco to win their division as an underdog. And man, I was wrong about that. So San Francisco, definitely disappointment this year from the NFC conference.
Greg, what about you? What team do you think that was a surprise to make the playoffs, and which one was the most disappointing that did not?
Surprised to make the playoffs would be Minnesota. I remember in the beginning of the season, before it even started, we were just shaking our heads with all of the bad luck the organization was having. I mean, they had a player die. McCarthy gets hurt. Another player hurt for the season. And what had Sam Darnold ever done? So at that point, it was like, yeah, this is just not going to be a good year for the Minnesota Vikings. And instead, they almost had the number 1 seed in the NFL's NFC. So they're the most positive, surprising team. And the negative, surprising team would be the Cleveland Browns, Jim Feist's favorite team. So I think that that's a slam dunk. We all expected a lot more out of the Browns, but don't fret, Browns fans, because Deshaun Watson will be back.
Oh, thanks.
Oh no, please, no.
Well, Jim, now that Greg threw that dart at you, I'm going to ask you the same question. Who's here that surprised you, and who didn't make it, other than the Cleveland Browns, that was disappointing?
Well, first of all, the biggest disappointment to me would be who I think is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, if not the best, and that would be Burrow in Cincinnati. The decline of their defense was astronomical. I couldn't believe how bad their defense was. Now, I gotta be surprised about the Denver rookie quarterback, Washington rookie quarterback. Minnesota had an over and under win total of 6.5, and they've already won 14. These are all surprising teams. But the biggest disappointment to me would be not Cleveland, because they haven't won anything in 60 years. I mean, but Cincinnati, with who I think Burrow is 1, 2, or 3 is the best quarterback in football. And with those wide receivers and they started out with a different running back, but then they had Brown, and he was good. That offense was prolific. And for them to just fall apart, they did the right thing. They fired the defensive coordinator, but, I don't know if it was totally his fault. The upper management doesn't spend any money there. And they let people walk. And even Burrow said, we're not going to ever win anything if they let the good players walk. That was his quote. And
well, I don't think. Excuse me, Jim. Let me interrupt you, but I don't think anybody expected to see the Cincinnati defense collapse like it did this year. Lou Anarumo, the head defensive coordinator, was heavily involved in becoming possibly a head coach just 2 years ago. So, like you say, somebody had to take the fall in Cincinnati.
Well, something happened to that defense. I know they lost players, but they let players walk. I mean, so it wasn't really that they were hurt, is they just didn't sign them. And that's what he was pissed about. Burrow, I mean, that's what he was pissed about. We can't, and he said, we can't let good players walk out the door and expect to win anything. But that
Joe
is
Mixon.
a very frugal, I would use the word frugal to be nice, but cheap is the right word, organization.
Yeah, a cheap prick is what they are. Andy, same question to you, bud. What do you think? Who surprised and who's here that is really the biggest surprise, and who was the biggest disappointment?
Well, I guess they've already been mentioned, so I'll choose amongst the three between Denver, Washington, and Minnesota. Although I guess you could say it's not really a surprise because I kind of thought it would happen. Chargers would be considered a surprise to some, considering they were 5-12 last year. But amongst Denver, Washington, and Minnesota, I've got to take Minnesota very simply because they exceeded their season win totals by like 8. I mean, I think both Washington and Denver were around also about 6 or so, 6.5. Minnesota was pretty much in that same range. So for them to go 14-3 with 2 of the losses to the number 1 seed in their own division, I think that's about as impressive an accomplishment as you could make. As far as the disappointing team, I'm inclined to say Cincinnati, and I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe I'm surprised that it hasn't happened, but I got to believe that Zach Taylor's on the hot seat. This is a team has so much talent. They were in the Super Bowl a few years ago. They missed the playoffs last year. They missed the playoffs this year. This year it was largely due to the defense to a certain extent last year as well. But the more concerning, the more troubling thing to me about Cincinnati is the way they play in the month of December, continuously getting off the poor starts and putting themselves in a hole before we reach October. And I think you've got to take a look at the coaching there, the preparation, etc. Because a team like Cincinnati, yeah, every team's going to have injury, and they had some injuries to start the season, but they should not be consistently being a team that is 1-3 or even 2-2 with that talent. So I'd say Cincinnati was the most disappointing team.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Andy. It'd be like maybe to draw a parallel. You mentioned Joe Burrow being a franchise quarterback, arguably, like Jim says, maybe the best quarterback in the National Football League. What would Robert Kraft have done at New England had the Patriots missed the playoffs back-to-back years with Tom Brady? Bill Belichick might not even be in the Hall of Fame if that had happened. So I agree with you. I think Cincinnati is the most disappointing, if for no other reason. Joe Burrow runs that ship here, and they need to do a better job surrounding him with talent. Let's get into the games this weekend, guys, here, starting with the first game.
Oh, excuse me, Mark.
Yes.
I was going to just say, I thought the comparison he was going to make was to the old San Diego Chargers with Dan Fouts, Hall of Fame quarterback, and a defense that gave up as much as they scored.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great parallel. Exactly.
I need to say one thing. I'm running up against the clock here. I have to get over there and do the other show in a few minutes. So I got about 15 minutes. Okay,
well, Jim, let me ask you. You be the leadoff here. Houston Chargers game. What's your take, real quick, on this football game, the playoff game?
The regression of Stroud, the offensive line, the loss of the wide receivers bother me, and it comes down to their play calling. They want to run the ball. They run the ball a lot on first and second down and put Stroud in bad position, always behind the 8 ball, trying to make it up on third down. So I have to criticize the offensive play calling. I guess I could criticize the head coach, but I'm not going to do that because I really don't know how much the offensive coordinator has to make all those decisions. And we're talking about the Chargers. Now, here's the Chargers, and we got to put this in there because we don't know the devastation of those fires in LA is where these guys live. And that's where they practice. I don't know how much effect these fires are having on the Charger players, coaches, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, if I live there and I'm worried on my family, my wife, my kids, my pets, my property, this could be a real issue. And I don't know that. I'm just throwing it out there because it is a possibility. It's a problem. I like the game under. I don't think there are going to be a lot of points. We've got Jim Harbaugh, which we know is a great coach. He's taken them a long way. Herbert is a better quarterback right now than Stroud, who's having a regression year. However, I do think he has a great future, but he is in regression. And and Herbert has played very well down the road. And Harbaugh's just he's as a coach, he's a genius. I mean, look at everything he's done. Every place he's been, Stanford or San Francisco or Michigan, he's everywhere he goes, he wins. So
I'm going to keep you here, Jim, because I know everybody wants to know what you're looking at, and I know you have to get off and going here. So I'm going to move on to the next game with you, and we'll circle back with the crew here in just a bit after you have to part. Baltimore-Pittsburgh, classic AFC Central matchup. Obviously, Mike Tomlin been there, done that. Baltimore looks to be a monster here right now at the stage of the football season. What do you take on this game? Are you laying the points or you're taking them?
I bet a teaser on Baltimore and under. And I went under 46, and it's now 43.5. Now, this is you know history better than anybody. You know the trends and stuff. Tomlin gives this team a hard time. He gives them a tough time. They've already played twice. Once was close. The other was a blowout. I'm not a Russell Wilson fan at this point in his career. And the way that Baltimore runs the ball, you got Henry with 1,900 yards. You got Lamar. You got a big edge with the running game and with the quarterback. And the way, I mean, how many teams have lost 4 games in a row that make the playoffs? I mean,
not very many.
And they don't look good doing it. I mean, yeah, they got lucky and covered against Cincinnati the other day with that backdoor cover, which I'm glad they did because
I know one team that did. The New York Jets. The New York Jets, I think, lost 5 straight games back in I don't know what year it was, in the 80s or something, and yet
Really?
they still made the postseason.
The Mark Sanchez years?
No, that was way back.
Okay.
Those are the Ken O'Brien years.
Okay.
And then
Walt Michaels was the coach at the time.
They beat the Chiefs in the first round. That was the game they led the Browns in the second round, had the big lead, and then lost it. They had led by 2 scores with like 3 minutes left and lost it. So yeah, so there is precedent on a team that has a losing streak.
5 straight losses and did
The Jets ended, because they got off to like an 11-1 start.
Wow.
And then they lost like 5 straight to go into the regular season.
It was kind of like Philadelphia last year, had that big start and then fell off. But
Yes,
they never
exactly.
got there. Right.
All right, Jim, next game, Buffalo-Denver. Matchup of surprising Denver Broncos, Buffalo Bills. Everybody has them going as far as maybe even the Super Bowl this football season. How are you playing this game?
Denver is leading as blitzing team or sacking team in the country on defense, but they got Knicks. And the thing about rookie quarterbacks on the road in the playoffs has not been a great statistic over the years, and I think you probably have a database on that. But going to Buffalo with Josh Allen, I don't think Buffalo's as good as Baltimore. So if they matched up, I'd probably be on Baltimore. I know I would. But Buffalo's tough, and you're going to put up points, and you got the way they play defense. They play single high. You're going to get a lot of man coverage. You're going to get Josh Allen with a lot of leg room. He's going to move the ball on the ground and through the air. I don't see Denver stacking up well in this game with a rookie on the road, even though I'm a big fan of how he's developed. Knicks, I'm talking about, and Sean Payton as a head coach. I'm a big fan of both. As a matter of fact, I probably like Payton better than the Buffalo head coach, but Buffalo has, I think, right now a better team.
By the way, just found out, getting back to your Baltimore game, that Zay Flowers is officially out. So he's not going to be playing for the Baltimore Ravens in their game against the Steelers.
Which further helps the under.
The under.
Philadelphia, Green Bay, Jim. Big battle in the NFC. Number 2, Philadelphia. Number 7, Green Bay. What do you think happens here?
Watson's on the IR, so he's not going to be there, and he takes the lid off the offense for Love, which could be an issue. Because Philadelphia is a pretty good defense. They run the ball extremely well. Green Bay's probably, I don't know if they're number 1 in rushing the ball or number 2, but they're really up there. And Philadelphia, of course, is 2. And then you got Hurts coming off the concussion protocol. And statistically, when somebody comes off the concussion protocol, they have about a 12 to 15% decline in performance, which could go along with the fact that maybe you're scared to get hit. Maybe you get racked up one more time, your career might be over. So they might run the ball. I mean, Barkley is incredible. You got running game on both sides. I see a lot of grinding in this game. I cannot lay this kind of spread with what I think is going to be a low-scoring game. So I'm under on this game.
How about Tampa and Washington, Jim, the second to last game being played here?
Washington's another rookie on they got a rookie quarterback on the road. I like what they've done there. They got rid of the owner. They got a better coaching staff. Quinn is good. Daniels is very good, 12-5 record. But, there's some kind of magic going on with, I don't know what the hell he's eating these days, but Baker is just a different guy. He's an MVP candidate on a not so great team. Now, yeah, they won this division, but it's a terrible division. It's kind of like Houston win their division. It's a terrible division, but they're playing really well. I'm not in love with it, but there's only one side to this game, or two sides. One is the over. The problem is I liked the over earlier when I thought there was quite a few, or three players actually on Tampa that were going to miss the game. They have now been ruled back mostly in. So that makes their defense a little bit tougher, and that might skew the game under. It's 50-50.5. I like it over, but I don't love it like I did in the beginning, but I do like Tampa to lay the points. But normally, as you know, when I play small favorites, I don't lay the points. I play the money line. So I have a money line bet on Tampa, and I have an over bet over 50.
Nice. And the going out the door play on a Monday, the Rams and the Vikings. What do you see going on there, Jim?
Well, Mark, I know who you like in this game. We've talked about this before.
Yes.
I don't know where this game is being played. If it's in LA, it's a big difference. But but although the Rams have not played well at home this year, they did lose to Miami, they did lose to Philly, and they looked ugly in both those games. They didn't score a lot or very well against the Jets, who are not a great team, although they have a little bit of a defense. But Minnesota's a better team. I mean, they're 14-3. They had a bad game against Detroit, but Detroit, that was a playoff game for Detroit. They wanted to rest up. They head coach came out. Their defensive coordinator called a great game plan. But when you watch the game over, and I watched it 3 times live, and then I watched 2 more of it, there was a lot of open players, and Darnold just missed everybody. And then the offensive play calling by Minnesota, I thought, was kind of coaching malpractice. They were going for long passes. And by that time, the defense for Detroit was on top of Darnold, and they shook him up really good. He didn't do well under that kind of pressure. If they'd have cut those routes off, he would have had a much better chance to get rid of the ball and not got sacked as much, not got hurt as much. So, to me, I don't know where the game's going to be played. If it's in Glendale, California, and I think it's 80-20, it's going to Glendale because of the air out there, the fires and stuff. So right now, I really don't have a side or a total in the game because I really don't know where the hell the game's going to be played.
Jim, just remember this, 14-3 Minnesota. All 14 wins this year came in games when they held an opponent to less than 30 points. All 3 losses came when they allowed opponent 30 or more points. That has to be the key number for the Rams in this football game. I'm going to let you go, buddy, here. I hope you have a good time at doing the pizza show. And if you will, order a little side calamari for me, if you will, while you're there, okay?
There was somebody that was at the show last week, and he enjoyed himself. He had a good I don't know what you ate, but it was good.
I had I don't remember what I did have. I think I had a Caesar salad or something. It was delicious. It was a lot of fun, Jim. I thank you for inviting me. We had a really good time and a lot of really good people. And also, we took questions from the audience, and there were a lot of really, really good questions as well.
Yes, there was.
And I want to remind everybody also, Jim, before I let you go, that the show Jim's talking about doing that from Dom DeMarco's in Las Vegas that he's going to be doing live here in just a moment or two. You can see that here on the Proline TV network. So you can also tune into that, into the ATS podcast, everything we're doing, anything you need to pick up in the world of sports handicapping on video will be available on Proline TV. Make that your move. Subscribe, if you will, right now, and hit the like button.
And now that Greg is doing with Brady Ken and the golf, and then he had a horse racing show, there's a lot of great information on there. You really got to go check it out. And when you go there, make sure you subscribe and hit the thumbs up, because that really helps with everything.
We like thumbs up. All right, Jimmy, have a great show. Be well, and we'll catch up with you next week, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Okay. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
That was the legend himself, Jim Feist, joining us on the show this week. And let's continue with our run around the National Football League playoffs this week. Let's go to that game that we were talking about that Jim had to leave us with. Houston Chargers, Victor, what do you see going on over under total wise?
There we go. There we go. I think I'm unmuted now.
Okay, there you go.
I'm not going to hit every single game. Obviously, guys, we have our own agendas. We're trying to sell our plays as well. But a couple of different wild card notes I do want to throw out there. And Jim did mention that he liked the under in that Chargers game. Obviously, it's the under or pass in the game. One thing about the NFL playoffs is anytime we get a road team favored by a field goal or more, the games have gone under the total at a very high percentage now. In the last 10 years, 1 over 10 unders. Playoff games in which the road team is favored by 2.5 or more points, like the Chargers are, and the over-under line is 40 or more in these games. So I'm with Jim. It's either the under or lay off the total in that particular game. As far as division round and championship round, we can obviously talk about those rounds and their tendencies, their ATS patterns, if you will, in the next week and two when we get to those rounds. But I do got some numbers here from the database, Mark, in regards to the wild card round. And generally speaking, we play the dogs in the wild card round, and then we start going the other way and think about laying the points when we get to the division round and when we get to the championship round. Wild card dogs now 23-12 ATS in the last 7 years. This is dating back to the 2018 postseason. Dogs right across the board have done very, very well. 23-12 ATS. These dogs have done even better, 19-5 in the wild card round when coming off a win in their last regular season game. The three teams this weekend who are off a win and who are catching points and are part of that 19-5 ATS situation are Houston on Saturday at the home dog against the Chargers, Denver plus the points on the road against Buffalo in Sunday's first game, and also Washington, who did win their game last week and is the underdog in the Sunday night game. So all three of those qualify in that 19-5 ATS situation. But caution when it comes to the big dogs. Again, we mentioned the dogs have done very well in this round, but dogs of 8 or more have actually only gone 4-4 ATS, and that's 2 of them this weekend, Pittsburgh and Denver. So the database is telling us to, if you're going to be grabbing the points with the dogs,
the competitive dogs, yes,
grab the shorter, more competitive dogs, and think twice about grabbing the long dogs, the Denvers and Pittsburghs of the world. Again, because it's the shorter, as Mark mentioned, more competitive dogs that have done outstanding in this wild card round.
Great stuff, Victor. Nice. Thanks for sharing all that with us. And around the horn here, guys, we're not going to get into every game. We're going to do what Victor did. We're going to hit on a game or two that stands out to each of our individual experts here. Any other game that stood out to you, Victor, or do you want to wait till next week?
No, I do want to throw in a play that I do like as far as totals go, and it's in Sunday's first game, and the line is starting to move. I really like the Buffalo-Denver game to go over the total. 46.5, if you can find it, folks. Play it now. It's going to go up even higher. It's already crossing into the 47 line mark. And if it gets to that key number of 48, we've already missed the boat in that particular game. But what I've got in as far as
Oh,
the
excuse me,
database,
Victor.
yeah, Eddie,
Anything that you'd be concerned about possible weather in Buffalo?
no, no. My latest weather report, all we care about is wind in Buffalo, and it'll be just fine in regards to the wind. Buffalo is surprisingly one of the better over the total playoff teams. Their last 30 playoff games, dating all the way back to 1990, 20 overs, 10 unders. Last 3 years, 6 out of their 7 playoff games have all gone over the total. At home right now, they've gone 9-2 to the over. Their last 11 home games dating back to last season. They've gone a perfect 10-0 to the other. Their last 11 games as conference favorites of less than 2 touchdowns. Denver. And when we do the math here, the implied score of the game is somewhere, 27 for Buffalo, maybe 19.5 for Denver. That's kind of the implied score of the game based on the point spread and the current over-under line. So Denver's line to put the game over the total is going to be 20 points. Can the Broncos get to 20 points this weekend? I'll say this. They've scored 24 or more points in each of their last 7 games. They've scored 27 or more in 6 of their last 7 games. The offense is playing well. And don't forget the fact that, Buffalo's coming off a rough December where they allowed 40-plus points against the Rams. They allowed 40-plus points against the Lions. They had a third high-scoring game. The opponent, it's not in my head right now. But this is a game that, Mark, I think we've got some value on the over, particularly if you can still find a 46.5 over the total Broncos-Bills.
Victor says, get it before it gets to 48, guys. The Broncos-Bills game over the total. Greg DePalma, our producer extraordinaire, I'm going to ask you the same question here. Any of these football games that jump out to you on this week's NFL football playoff card?
Probably just 2, and that would be the first one, the Chargers in Houston. I just believe, obviously, in everything that Jim Harbaugh is doing there. He has built is beginning to build a really good football team, and this is the first step. They're not going to go very far, you would think, even though if they do play the Chiefs in the second round, that could be very interesting, and that could actually give the Chiefs something to think about. But I just don't like the way Houston played this season. I think they're very fortunate to win. Similar to what Andy said about how Tampa Bay didn't have to worry about playing in a tough division. Same thing with Houston. But they were able to get it done. I think they have too many key guys, though, including, of course, not having Diggs and Dell in are big losses. So I like the Chargers, and I guess the top money line play would be the Packers.
There we go. Chargers and Packers for Greg DePalma. Andy Isco, how do you see this wild card round weekend shaking out?
Well, I'm going to go with one favorite and one underdog, and it's going to actually the favorite's going to be against the situation that Victor talked about, and the other favorite's going to be in the Green Bay Philadelphia game that Greg likes, the Packers. I'll start with the Philadelphia game. I think that number one, the loss of Watson for the Packers is going to be huge because Philadelphia, number one this year in the league in pass defense. These teams met back in Brazil in week 1. It was 34-29. The Eagles won that game. But they faced a Philadelphia defense that has shown tremendous improvement over the last 8 to 10 games. They've been just outstanding, and I think that's going to create some problems. It might also give me a reason to look at the under in that game. We don't know about Hurts. I have to believe he's going to play. Jim talked about I think it was either Jim or you, Mark, that talked about the decline coming off concussions. I think a lot of it has to do not so much with tentativeness as perhaps just the brain itself taking a little time to process information. That may cause a little bit of that 10 to 15% decline in performance. I'm not really sure. He did practice limited on Wednesday. I imagine he'll be cleared to go. But even if the backups have to go, I place so much emphasis on this Philadelphia defense that even though it's a low total, I can see this game being something like a 23-14 type game with Philadelphia coming out on top. So I'm going to go with Philadelphia in that one. And I'm going to take the points with Pittsburgh against Baltimore. Was the last game against the Steelers and Ravens, was that the outlier with Lamar finally getting over the hump, or was it just an atypical game because of all the pressure that was on Lamar to have a good game against Pittsburgh? Forget playoffs or regular season. He's had trouble against them, 4 or 5 in a row, I think, in that series. But again, I don't need Pittsburgh to win this game to get the money. I just need them to be competitive. Remember the last game that they played, Pickens was out for the Steelers, and that makes a big difference. Also, they've lost 4 in a row, but and 3 of those losses were by double digits. But last week, it was a 2-point loss at home to Cincinnati in a game that meant everything for Cincinnati. Meant something to Pittsburgh. They could have won that game and ended up going to Houston rather than back to Baltimore. But the familiarity between these two teams suggests that it's more likely than not to be a competitive game, even though Pittsburgh has been struggling, and even though Baltimore, and understandably so, has looked like, if not the best, one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the league over the last 8 to 10 weeks.
Andy Iskoe with his view on this weekend's NFL wildcard round football games. Before I turn it over to Greg DePalma, as we spin around and get 60-second takes from all of our experts, I'll just say this, that you will not find me on any favorite on this particular weekend's football card. Victor alluded to it. This is the round that the dogs bark their loudest, and I'll share this with you from the Playbook Football Guide newsletter magazine. Wildcard round home dogs are on a 24-10 against the spread run. So keep that in mind this particular weekend. With that, Greg, I'm going to hand it over to you for our 60-second spin.
I'm going to go with the Minnesota Rams game. I do expect that we'll be going to Glendale, but I also have to agree with not just some of the points that Jim made, and maybe we talked about it earlier, about the uncertain situation with the Rams and the players who live in the area. That has to be a distraction, not just for when the game is played, but even right now during the week, they got to be keeping their eyes, one eye on the practice routine and one eye on the TV set for news. Minnesota, on the other hand, 14-3. You could make a case that they deserve to get a bye, but even the fundamentals, they have edges. Yards per rush, 4.1 versus 3.9. Similar edge in defensive yards per rush. An edge in pass completions, offense and defense. Just so many statistical edges that demonstrate the reason why this team has won 14 games. And I mentioned 2 of the 3 losses were to Detroit. So this is a team that plays close games, knows how to play close games. And whether it's in LA or in Glendale, I'm going with the Vikings to win.
Perfect. 58 seconds, Andy. Beautiful. All right, Mark.
Well, he's getting that down pat here.
Yes, he is.
Okay, my short is going to be a warning about a favorite on the National Football League playoff card this week. Warning the Buffalo Bills. They were only 2-3 this year against teams that reached the playoffs, and they allowed 108 more yards per game against playoff teams than non-playoff teams. They've got a leaky defensive problem going on here. The Buffalo defense also allowed 33 points a game against all playoff teams. That's the 4th highest in NFL playoff history. Now you take a look at the other side of the coin here. Denver led the league in quarterback sacks this year with 63. You simply can't fade Sean Payton in his 40-25 spread record in his career in the National Football League. This Denver defense is beat up, and I think Denver is on the come right now. I think they're a live dog, the Denver Broncos here. Play them plus the points for my NFL short.
Excellent. Way under at 45 seconds. All right. So before we wrap up, though, we want to go back into the Coffee Club email to take a look at some of the most recent comments from the past week or two. Let's see. B_Mac24. These are the OGs. They have the picks and the best picks in my personal opinion. Absolutely great work, guys. So that is B_Mac24. Big fans of Playbook. And LA Boyo missed the Stardust line with Andy and Ted. Best show of its kind ever.
We had a lot of fun back in those days on Saturday nights, going over the colleges and previewing the pros, and even me attempting to pick some of the exact scores of the game. I'd get them about right at one score every 2 to 3 years.
Andy, was that you and Ted Cervansky? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Seat Williams and Gene Harvey, the outstanding producer.
Yes.
There you go. And again, don't forget the Coffee Club email, right, Mark? Because you can get that in your inbox every morning. What does it come in? Like about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock?
Yeah, it comes in 6 o'clock every morning. Everybody thinks that I send it out. I don't. It's all pre-programmed. It's there
No wonder you listen to all these shows.
at 6 in the morning. But here's the deal, guys. If you want to get this Coffee Club, you can do it. It's a no-charge bonus when you subscribe to any of our services or publications. And right now, anybody that subscribes to next year's publications is not only going to get the Coffee Club as a free no-charge bonus, you're going to also get all of my NFL playoff selections from my Preferred Picks football service as well. No charge, free of charge. You can check it out all online, playbooksports.com.
And that's going to wrap it up. So, Mark, it's been nice having you back. It's been about almost a month.
Yeah, we've missed you.
Yeah. And it's not even the summer and you're missing time. So, because once the summer comes and you start getting involved with the next edition of the Playbook football guide, you'll definitely be missing some time then.
Yeah, we'll start the magazine right as soon as the Super Bowl's over here. We'll be crunching, if you will, for sure, no doubt about it, in May and June, unquestionably about that. And the time I took off here, guys, a lot of it was attributed to our work with the Playbook publications and also me securing this house from Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah, you only wish. Don't forget. Also, we have a.
By the way, excuse me. Let me just say for Mark, I know the feeling. It is horrible having to move during football season.
Oh,
it's also worse to go through a hurricane during football season.
Yeah, that too.
I can't believe I missed games that I've never missed in my entire life.
And you're not the guy that's supposed to be talking about going hurricanes through the football season, Greg.
No, not at all.
No.
Don't forget also we have a NFL Super Bowl and playoff preview show that we just did with Jim and Mark and myself and Ryan Dunleavy of the New York Post. So that's available. You'll be able to see it right now in the library here at Proline TV. And I'm sure Jim and I will probably do another show most likely tomorrow. The Saturdays are off because there are playoff games on Saturday. And then I don't know if it's going to be next week or the week after, but we're going to have to brainstorm when we start talking college hoops on this show, Mark. I gotta think it's going to be real soon.
Yeah, we'll put a plan in place. Like I mentioned, Greg, our first Playbook basketball newsletter is going to be available this Saturday in time for the weekend games for the next week. So check that out also at playbooksports.com.
And last week,
I was going to think, Greg, maybe the week to do it to start will be the week we preview the championship games because there's only two that we'll have to talk about as far as football.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And then of course, the college football championship will be behind as well.
The week before,
yeah, and that also gives us a few more weeks to get up to speed. But hey, last week on the show, we talked a little bit, and we mentioned the SEC, and I said my team right now is Florida, and they sure kicked the heck out of Tennessee.
Yeah, beat up Tennessee, right?
And I looked at their odds, and I went ahead and put some money on them. They were still 15-1. I thought that was a pretty good number, actually, for Florida to win the national championship. So I went ahead and I put a little action on the Gators.
They beat the Tennessee team so badly that the coach is now looking for some more volunteers. Ooh, sorry.
Good try.
Real play on words there, Andy.
We're out of here after that. I'm not sure if Andy will be allowed back.
All right, guys, next week, be well, stay safe, and remember to always bet with your head, not over it, and good luck as always.